Welcome to this edition's Spotlight Leaders, a series of interviews with leaders in healthcare and medicine about their professional careers, inspirations, as well as motivations. This time, it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome Dr. Holden Thorp, the editor-in-chief of one of the most prestigious journals in the world, Science Magazine. Dr. Thorp earned his Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry in 1986 at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Later on, in 1989, he earned a doctorate in chemistry at the prestigious California Institute of Technology. After his research career and his postdoctoral work at Yale University, he co-founded a few biotechnology companies before moving to leadership positions in academia. Firstly, he moved to his home University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he became the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and later on, even the Chancellor of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Finally, he moved to the position of Provost at Washington University in St. Louis before assuming his present position as the editor-in-chief of Science Magazine. We talked to Dr. Thorp about his professional career, about his motivations, about his inspirations, and about his passion for music. Enjoy the interview. Thank you very much for joining us in this edition's Spotlight Leaders.
It's great to be here, Alan. Thanks so much for including me.
Thank you very much for your time. So we can maybe start with your early life. You were initially a pre-medical student in college, as I read, but you turned to chemistry. So maybe can you tell us what intrigued you so much about chemistry to choose that career path?
Yeah, that's a pretty simple story. I had a great high school chemistry teacher. Bill Winfield was his name, at Terry Sanford High School in Fayetteville, North Carolina. But there were no scientists lived in my hometown. So, you know, I'm from Fayetteville, North Carolina. Not a lot of scientists live there. So the people I knew who were good at chemistry were all physicians. So I thought that was the only option that I knew about. But when I went to a big research university like the University of North Carolina, I had the opportunity to meet the scientists who were my professors and then get in a research lab. Then I found out about a whole career that I didn't even really know anything about. And once I did, I decided I wanted to do that. So it was really just about, and this is why we got to get more people, you know, the opportunity to go to places like the University of North Carolina where they can find out these things.
Yeah, pretty simple, but still a great story. And speaking of the University of North Carolina, you also, it seems to me, became interested in leadership positions. So you were the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of North Carolina, and later on the Chancellor of that university. So maybe can you tell me what intrigued you so much about leadership positions in academia?
Yeah, well, most people who go into administrative jobs in universities don't set out to do that. And certainly I didn't. My plan was to have a big lab and run my lab for my whole career. But eventually, as with most people who make full professor, eventually people started handing me things to do. And it turned out that I enjoyed a lot of those, and helping other people be successful was something that, you know, I got a lot out of. And that's, you know, that's what I do in my current job. My job is to make our authors look good. And university administrator's job is to make the students and faculty look good. And I enjoy doing that. So it's about as simple as that. I did a few of these things. Next thing I know, people wanted me to be the chair of my department, and then you know, once you become a dean, you're kind of committed. So when I decided to put my name in to be dean, then I was basically an administrator. I started winding my lab down, and I did full-time administration for almost 15 years.
Yeah, and apart from those positions, you also seem interested in biotech companies. I mean, you co-founded a couple of them, so you basically pivoted into entrepreneurship in some way. So, like, what were the motivations behind
I was doing that long before I went into administration. So I started my first company, Xanthon, in 1996. We were a DNA chip company. It was when Affymetrix was making their microarrays for gene expression. Now we have a much more sensible way of doing this all these years later. But a bunch of companies started off trying to do various things with nucleic acids on solid surfaces. And we had a novel detection mechanism that was quite sensitive. And we started a company, but a bunch of things happened. The biggest probably was we ran out of money in 2001. That wasn't a good time to run out of money in America. And unfortunately, we hadn't been smart enough to arrange the kind of partnerships that would help us get through something like that ahead of time.
I see. I see. Yeah. And basically after that, you took these leadership positions, and after that, you took the current position in 2019 as the editor-in-chief of the Science magazine family. So basically, can you maybe tell us why you applied to this job? Because as far as I've read, you had little experience with being an editor at a scientific journal. So was it quite different from academia and biotech? And
very different. I mean, but I had, as you pointed out, I was a department chair, and then I was a dean, and then I was a chancellor, and then I was a provost. So I had decided it was time to do something different rather than running universities, which, I always say to people, it's like being in an episode of 24, except it doesn't end in one day. It's a relentless, very taxing thing to do, where you're making many decisions every day. And so after all the time that I spent doing that, and I had a wonderful time at the University of North Carolina. I mean, I had a good time at both places, but I had a wonderful time at Washington University in St. Louis, where I worked for Mark Wrighton, who was the chancellor when I was the provost. He retired, and I decided it was time for me to go have another chapter in my life, and wanted to look at things that were similar but outside of academic administration. And so when they started calling around for this job, it was definitely one I was interested in. And I was very fortunate that I worked out. It's a job anybody who loves science and policy and the internet would love to do.
For sure.
It's a really engaging job, and I work with some really brilliant people.
For sure. And maybe before applying to this job, did you maybe have a vision of what you would like to do with Science magazine, or not, even before you applied for the job?
Not really. I mean, when you go, sometimes you go take a job at something that really needs to be changed and fixed and renovated. And certainly Science magazine was in no trouble when I took over. It's we think it's the best in the world at what we do. And I think there's a case that that's true. There are a few other journals that might disagree with us about that. So, I just thought it would be an extraordinary privilege. And I did know that there were a lot of changes in access to scientific information. And so I felt like the fact that I'd run two universities that had two really large academic libraries and lots of scientists looking at the literature, that would give me a good perspective to deal with the changes to the way scientific information is managed. And I think that's probably what the search committee thought they needed. Little did I know there was going to be a worldwide pandemic. And that discussion of science and disagreement about science was going to become the extraordinary issue that it has become. It is true that when Alan Leshner, who was then the interim CEO of the AAAS, hired me, he said, I want you to write some more edgy editorials than we've had. Neither of us knew how urgent that would be. But I think we have succeeded at developing a stronger voice. And I think science really needs that.
Yeah,
Science, science the enterprise, not just science the journal.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of the pandemic, can you maybe share with us how Science Magazine adapted to this basically unprecedented situations, and maybe the lessons all of you learned from this pandemic?
Yeah, well, I would say, I mean, I think as a lot of people following scientific research would know, we got together with a lot of the top journals, and we all decided that we would make COVID research free on our website, and that we would encourage people to submit preprints, and that we would not have an embargo when we post the papers, and and that we would handle them as expeditiously as possible. We didn't know the volume that we were signing up for at that point, but it wasn't long after that Barney Graham and Jason McClellan sent us the structure of the spike protein. February 10th, they sent it to us. We published it on February 19th.
Pretty quick.
Yeah, it's been cited, last time I looked, more than 3,000 times. And I think there's a case to be made that at least at the moment, the spike protein is the most famous protein in the world.
Yeah, so, for sure.
We were happy to have that structure in our journal. And from there, lots of stuff flowed through. I think what we've learned is that we can do things this fast if we have to, that it's hard to sustain. After 2 or 3 months of that, things kind of settled down into more of an equilibrium. I think the preprints have, for the most part, been good. We've always been okay with preprints. Some preprints have been exploited by people who want to spread bad information. Our job is to get to the right scientific answer. So we think preprints have helped us do that. And I would say, the other lesson is that, and look, this has always been true. It's always been the case that if you have two political parties that are designed to disagree with each other, and one of them chooses a rigorous scientific position, the other one by definition cannot choose that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's been true for a lot longer than just COVID. Everybody thinks, oh, there's all this political polarization now around COVID. Well, no, we've had the same thing on climate change, evolution, genetically modified organisms, stem cells. The parties don't take the same positions. And if one of those positions is a scientific position, then the other one is going to be the opposite. Okay.
Yeah.
There's no way around that. That's how two-party politics works. But we've seen, this has by far been the most extreme example in its intensity. I think in the long run, the disagreements over climate change will be even more problematic. But this is something that lots of people have watched up close, that science plays a role in politics. And when it does, it gets caught up in the same divisiveness that all other political issues get caught up in.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I agree with everything you said, and I mean, scientific journals in general played a huge role during the pandemic, for sure. And speaking of journals, I'm just curious. What do you think are the differentiating factors, if any, between these top quality journals such as Nature, Cell, Science? Are there any differentiating factors? I mean, why would, for example, a person choose to publish in Science instead of Nature or Cell, for example?
Well, the honest answer is lots of people would like to be in all three of these journals, and if they could get in one, they probably don't care which one it is. But to us, there's a very, very big difference, and we hope that that's true for scientists. We are nonprofit. And so when we make a surplus, which we do every year, that surplus goes to fund the outstanding work of the association, promoting science literacy and science diplomacy and better use of science in government and those kinds of things, which are important to us. And when Cell and Nature make money, those profits go to the shareholders of Elsevier and Springer Nature. So, you know, we think what we do has a higher purpose than what they do. Publishing the science and doing it accurately is one higher purpose, but taking the revenue and using it to support something wholesome, we think that's also important. And that's why many of us work where we do. And on top of that, we have not and do not have plans to charge people $11,000 or $12,000 to make their paper open access when most scientists already have a subscription through their university to all three of these journals, and where the commercial journals are already getting paid with their subscription. Now they're getting paid with a very high article processing charge on top of that. And that is reducing the amount of science that gets done because it's taking money out of people's labs. And we don't do that. We do have an open access journal, Science Advances. The APC is lower than its main competitor, Nature Comms. And, you know, we use the money that we make on subscriptions to help keep that APC lower. And, you know, we're committed to continuing to try to do that.
Yeah, and what are your like general views on open access science? I mean, many of these journals, as you mentioned, you know, Nature, Cell, and others, I mean, do charge a pretty significant a fee. So do you think that maybe in the future all journals should be open access? I mean, basically that anybody can access the article for free or not. What do you think about that?
Right. So the question is, you know, who's this open access for? I mean, most of the research, and we're only talking about research papers. We're not talking about news and insights. That's a different discussion. But most of the researchers are researchers at universities that already have subscriptions to all of these journals, and most of us, certainly we do, have a model where in countries, for example, that have less money for research, we charge less for the license. So we have a progressive model already. An APC is a regressive flat tax because it's the same amount for everybody. And if you tried to have a sliding scale, I mean, that would be a very chaotic system, and it would cost more to administer than you could save. So, you know, neither a subscription or APCs are a perfect system. They both have a bunch of flaws. We happen to think that our situation, where we have 5 subscription journals and 1 open access journal whose APC is below the market price for its impact factor, that's where the subscriptions are progressively priced around the world, that's about as progressive a model you can come up with without just getting rid of journals altogether. So you know, I think it's more believable that the people who are trying to just get rid of all journals, I don't think they're going to succeed, because I think scientists want to have their research peer reviewed. But to say that APC driven gold OA is a more progressive model than subscriptions, I think is a hard case to make. And I think a lot of people are waking up to that. You know, I think I even saw Robert Kiley, who runs Plan S now recently, you know, after years of saying gold OA was the answer, now he's saying, well, we should just get rid of journals altogether. I'm not too worried about that disrupting science. But the people who are coming up with new ways of disclosing science to each other and keeping it on the internet and all that stuff, good. I look forward to seeing what they come up with.
Mm,
There'll probably be some things there that make science better that we can learn from.
yeah, yeah. And we're in the final few minutes of the interview, so I just want to ask you a few maybe interesting questions. As the
Sure.
editor-in-chief of one of the most prestigious journals basically in the world, or the most prestigious, depending on who you ask. Can you maybe share with us how your day-to-day job looks like? What do you do on a daily basis for the
Yeah.
journal?
So, like any manager, I have people who work for me. So I have
Mm,
10 direct reports. That's a lot fewer than I had when I was in university management.
mhm,
So I spend time meeting one-on-one with all those folks to make sure they're successful. They're the editors of the different journals and the people who run our PR functions and our visuals and internet operation, and our budget and stuff like that. So I do
mhm,
basic things that all managers do. Um, I usually write an editorial almost every week, so I have to carve out time to do that. Sometimes that's on the weekend.
mhm,
I participate in lots of things for the association, not just for the journals, to support my boss, Sudip Parikh, and the work that he and his colleagues are doing. I do stuff like this, promoting science
Thank you.
to the world, which is a big part of my job. And hopefully over the next few months, that'll be more and more in person.
Mm,
I'm tired of Zoom, just like everybody else.
yeah.
I'm hoping after Omicron, we'll get a little while before the next variant comes along where I can get out on the road and talk to scientists
Mm,
in person.
mm.
I'm very much looking forward to doing that.
Mm, yeah, yeah, and since most of our audience are younger scientists or younger physicians who will be watching this interview, is there any some advice that you want to give younger scientists who are just starting out their careers based on your extensive experience?
Yeah, I would say do the parts of your job that you really, really love. Um, do it passionately, and try not to get caught up in a lot of these external measures of how you're doing. I know that's easier said than done
Mm,
because particularly if you're a physician scientist, you've got RVUs and all this stuff to worry about. And if you're a young faculty member, you're worried about getting tenure, and dealing with all kinds of sociological factors within the university. But we need people who are excited about science.
yeah.
Uh, and I think the other thing is find safe people you can talk to about how we can make the whole enterprise better.
Mm,
I get that not everyone is in power is someone like that, but if you can find people, we absolutely need to hear uh, from people who are just starting out about how they want to see science to change. It's our job to do the heavy lifting of changing it.
mm,
But those of us who've been around a long time might not always know exactly what's going on. And again, it's our job to figure that out. And when people are willing to talk to us about it, boy, that is sure a big help. So it's
yeah.
not a requirement to do that, but for the people who feel like they can, boy, it sure would help us all to learn more about what it's like starting a career and getting going in science.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that people like yourself want to hear these young voices, where they see science, in the future. I think that's
Yeah.
that's great. And our last segment that we always have in this interview is our 5 quick fire questions.
Okay.
So
All
short
right.
questions and short answers, and that's the end of the interview,
All
basically. So
right.
the first question is, do you have a role model, and who's your role model, if you do?
Ooh. Well, I think uh, the best person ever in university management was Freeman Herbowski, who ran the University of Maryland in Baltimore County and just announced that he's retiring. So that's a good one to choose for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
That was off,
Second,
you said a quick
uh-huh.
question.
Yeah, exactly. Quick question,
Yeah.
short answer. The second one, what's the most important leadership skill you've learned?
Oh, I would say realizing that there's no shortcut through any problem. So if you've got a problem, just go ahead and deal with it. The people who put it off, it always gets them in the end. So don't run away from problems. Deal with them openly, honestly, compassionately, get them fixed, and go on to the next thing.
Is that also the best advice you were ever given? Because that's my third question. The best advice you've ever you've been given?
Well, I've gotten a lot of great advice over the years, but I worked for when I ran the University of North Carolina, I worked for Erskine Bowles, who had been the chief of staff, and he always told me to underpromise and overdeliver, and I think that's good. There's a lot of overconfidence in the world, and if you can help reduce it a little bit and then surprise people, that beats the alternative by a mile. Yeah,
for sure. And the fourth one, I have to ask you, since the Science family of magazines has quite a few journals, do you have a favorite one?
Oh, no one has a favorite child, so
I still had to ask.
I love all 6 of them. Yeah,
great answer. And our last question, since I read you're also quite passionate about music, I have to ask, do you prefer playing music or writing scientific articles?
Anybody who can play music, if they could, would do it for a living. And certainly I would. I'm fortunate because I still am able to work in playing the bass and the bass guitar for college musicals into my schedule. I got 2 I'm learning right now. And yeah, I'd lose my mind if I couldn't do that.
Great. That's the end of our interview, Dr. Thorp. Thank you very, very much. It was a pleasure talking to you, and thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome, Alan. Good talking.